Has Blizzard let you down? Me too. Let's talk about how they really failed their fans. This wasn't always the case though. In this video, we'll take a trip back in time before they were Blizzard, to what led them to the top of the gaming world, creating games that gamers wanted. And then we'll dive into their terrible and rather questionable decision making and behavior that has turned them into an empty husk of what Blizzard used to be. It all started with three dudes from UCLA, Alan Adham, Michael Morheim, and Frank Pierce, who would go on to form Silicon and Synapse. In their beginnings, they were in the business of porting games to, get the hang of coding. Their very first original games were released in 1992, Rock and Roll Racing and The Lost Vikings, for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or Super Nintendo for short. While these weren't the best games, they were simple and fun. Rock and Roll Racing was a death race where players could upgrade their car's engine and weapons with the money that they earned. The Lost Vikings was a platformer featuring three humorous Vikings that players have to switch through to complete various puzzles. What is cool about this is that you can clearly see the guys had a certain type of comedy that would be engraved into their future characters. While that was going on, there was another studio though creating a game called Dune 2, The Building of a Dynasty by Westwood Studios. This game is only important to know because it set the format for basically every hit RTS game after it. But before we get into that, the lads would release another Super Nintendo game, Blackthorn, which would be their first title under their new studio name, Blizzard Entertainment, which they picked from a dictionary. It's kind of crazy looking back on their first works and seeing some pretty big elements that would craft their games in the future. Finally, in the summer of 1994, Blizzard would unknowingly release a game that would forever change the gaming world, Warcraft, Orcs and Humans. The game was hugely inspired by the Dune 2 RTS that was mentioned earlier, but would improve upon the gameplay by adding the core ability to select more than one unit at a time. Yes, there was a time where this wasn't possible to do. This new ability would be a groundbreaking change to the genre, but the biggest thing Warcraft 1 did was create thousands of gamers who wanted to play online, whether that be by modem or LAN style, which started the early trend of online gaming. Warcraft 2 Tides of Darkness will be Blizzard's next big hit and completely dominate the market, winning almost every award possible in 1996. The game drastically improved upon from Warcraft 1, adding the famous Fog of War element, scouting units, and those great lines a unit would say when you repeatedly clicked on them.
Yes, me lord. Yes, me lord.
Blizzard created a war with Command and Conquer, which birthed RTS superfans, spurred innovation in the genre, and would bring real-time strategy gaming to the mainstream. Now, if you know Blizzard, then you know the next huge game, Diablo. Now, sorry for breaking the immersion, but what I didn't know about Diablo is that it wasn't originally their idea, but an idea from David Brevik from Condor Games, who Blizzard would acquire and rename Blizzard North. Brevik was envisioning a roguelike game that featured turn-based gameplay among other ideas, like this little idea that loot from slain enemies would be more expansive. After being told that RPGs were dead by every other studio, Condor Games went to Blizzard. Blizzard decided they would help and work on the game, but only if they could make two major changes: make the game real-time and add multiplayer. And when Diablo was released, it blew Blizzard's initial sale estimates of 100,000 by 5 times that, and would end up selling over 2 million copies within 2 years. This was helped by the use of Blizzard's first iteration of Battle.net for online play, so it looks like the guys knew what they were talking about. The time after Diablo release was hectic for Blizzard to say the least. They would create another genre-defining masterpiece, StarCraft, which was a sci-fi more serious Warcraft, but in classic Blizzard fashion, made it even better by weaving a story into the gameplay, using an isometric viewpoint, and would have 3 very different races, the Protoss, Terran, and the Zerg. And in that same year, Diablo 2 would be released next, and become 2000's fastest PC game ever sold, selling over 2.75 million copies within the first year. But the crazy part is that during this time of those 2 releases, Blizzard Entertainment was getting tossed around with its ownership. And sparing the details, and there's a lot of them, Blizzard was bought by Davidson and Associates, the Math Blaster people, who were then bought by CUC International, or as I like to call them, Cuck International, who then merged with HFS Corporation, who would become Sendent, which led to Sendent being sold off to Sierra Online to Havas, who was then sold to Vivendi. And in spite of all this going on, in 2001, Blizzard was still able to create my favorite Blizzard game ever, Warcraft 3. Warcraft 3 brought the world of craft into 3 dimensions with great immersive story and the campaign editor, which allowed people to create any type of game they wanted, like tower defenses, angel arenas, and one ice frog to create one of the greatest games ever made, Dota. Warcraft 3 would go on to sell 1 million units in the first month alone, becoming the fastest selling PC video game in history at the time, passing even Diablo 2. But there was something else on the horizon that would do better than that. World of Warcraft was a cultivation of everything Blizzard had been working on for the last 10 years, turned into one gigantic industry-defining title in 2004. It had their DNA of amazing storytelling and immersion, their humor, their art style, the music, and their online capabilities. It had everything that fans loved about Blizzard, all in one game. WoW was Blizzard's magnum opus. But while this was going on, 2004 would also be the year one of the founders, Alan Adham, would leave Blizzard. As you can see, knowing Blizzard's past is really the key seeing just how far they've fallen. Blizzard was known for putting their games ahead of deadlines because they were a company ran and made up of gamers themselves, who really focused on creating amazing games before they even worried about sales. There were games that Blizzard were working on that they canceled because they weren't good enough. And instead of releasing something that wasn't good enough, they would rather end it and start something better. Every time a game was released by Blizzard, it was an incredible upgrade and gave the players what they wanted. It's hard to imagine a company like Blizzard, who created amazing games for their fans, begin to lose sight of their own values. But that's exactly what happened. Remember that really confusing section about how Blizzard was owned by 54 different studios and ended up at Vivendi? Well, that would finally come to an end when Bobby Kotick of Activision came knocking. See, good old Bobby and Activision wanted in on that MMO subscription money. And who better than the biggest MMO ever, World of Warcraft? Sparing a lot more details, when Kotick went to Vivendi about a merger, Kotick wasn't going to accept the deal in the beginning because Levy, the CEO of Vivendi, wanted to remain in control. But when Kotick spoke to Mike Morhaime, it was mentioned that Blizzard games, especially WoW, were about to bust through the Chinese market. And Kotick's eyes probably lit up. And this is why he agreed to the merger of $18.9 billion in 2008. We would then see 3 expansions that would release for WoW in this time from 2007 to 2010, Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King, and Cataclysm, which kind of sums up Activision. With each one, Blizzard would hurt the game more and more. But the nail that killed the game and all social interaction really was the Dungeon Finder and Wrath. These wouldn't be the only issues with WoW, as WoW would still go on a steady decline, but we'll get into those later. Blizzard did release the successful StarCraft 2 after the Activision merger, proving that they still had some ability left in the tank, until Diablo 3 came out in 2012. Diablo 3 would become the least like Diablo in the franchise. The game seemed too easy and dumbed down from its predecessors, which would seem like a new theme coming from Activision Blizzard, judging by what they were doing with WoW. The boss fights were barely boss fights, Belial not hard, Osmodin not hard, even the Primeval was a short fight. It didn't make players have to really try. The game was way more focused on the casuals, and I didn't really want to say that, but it is what it is. Diablo 3 would also launch with what is arguably the beginning of the end for Activision Blizzard, the auction house. The auction house in Diablo 3 was a mess, for the fact that it even existed in the first place. Why would you play the game where you can just buy the gear you wanted? And not just buy with gold, but real money. Yes, the real money auction house was a real thing. Players could spend real money to buy the best gear possible. Of course, Activision Blizzard got a cut of the sales. This would be the beginning of Activision Blizzard dabbling into adding systems for more money. By the way, it also took them 2 years to remove the auction house from the game. But it wasn't all downhill for them. In 2014, Blizzard would release a monster of a game in a new category, the digital collectible card game, Hearthstone. And in typical Blizzard fashion, they took over the genre. The game was easy to pick up for new players, but it also offered enough depth that new players and pros alike could get into the game. And then the game blew up and started making $40 million a month in 2017. And this is the Activision problem here. It was the continuation of the new problem with them, microtransactions. Players are able to spend real money for new packs, cards, and expansions. Now, while it isn't pay to win per se, it is pay to get better decks quicker than the free-to-play people. And with new cards always coming out, there is always something to buy. The next 2 years would be the last games that Blizzard would make for almost 6 years. Heroes of the Storm and Overwatch. Heroes of the Storm was Blizzard's attempt at creating a Dota League of Legends contender with their insane universe, since they didn't actually own the Dota name. But the game was just kinda I played it for like a week, and being a huge League of Legends guy and Dota guy, the game was just way too easy. But this was at initial release, but apparently it didn't get any better since in 2018, Blizzard out of nowhere canceled the Heroes of the Storm pro scene, basically ending the game. Overwatch took the gaming world by storm. The team-based multiplayer FPS hero shooter Team Fortress copy was another Blizzard creation that took over the genre. Each character was distinctly different. The maps are well designed, the graphics and sound design are top notch. It's everything you would expect from a Blizzard game. But it's not just Blizzard now, it's Activision Blizzard. So, welcome loot boxes. Overwatch's loot boxes are cosmetic only in nature. But with its success, the game kind of started microtransactions as part of the metagame experience. Overwatch would make $500 million in its first year, thus making it the highest grossing paid game for PC. But at least with Overwatch 2, there'll be no loot boxes, or 6v6, or as much teamwork needed. But hey, there'll definitely be a battle pass. 2016 would also be the year that Alan Adham would finally rejoin Blizzard, which might have proven to be a mistake. The years from 2016 to present are horrific for Activision Blizzard. WoW at this point is declining with lackluster expansions, prompting players to want to revisit the golden years of vanilla WoW. This was only possible with the private server Nostarius, but that was taking players from Activision, so Activision Blizzard had Nostarius shut down. Fans at BlizzCon 2016 wanted to know if Blizzard had any plans for Classic, as there seemed to be an open opportunity now. And well,
have you ever thought about adding servers for previous expansions as they were then?
No. And by the way, you don't want to do that either. You think you do, but you don't.
This reply is completely tone deaf and actually very rude, especially coming from the future president of Blizzard. The audacity of telling your literal fans what they think they want and don't want is utterly ridiculous, especially coming from Blizzard, who made their reputation of creating for the fans. Obviously, this didn't go down well with their fan base, and 3 years later, so it looks like the fans do know what they want. This finally brings us to the dreaded year of 2018. Firstly, WoW was still having a ton of issues, and the next expansion, Battle of Azeroth, was making it worse. The devs were on an extended lunch break at this point and were completely missing from the community, and they kind of just did whatever they wanted with no communication to the fanbase. Adding the confusing and just lame Azerite armor turned a lot of heads away from WoW. Mike Morhaime, a co-founder, would leave Blizzard after 27 years and was replaced with this guy.
Want to do that either. You think you do, but you don't.
But the worst was yet to come. Blizzard wanted to outdo what they did in BlizzCon 2013, apparently. BlizzConners around the world were waiting for a huge announcement at the end of the show. Like, you know, a new dope Diablo 4 for their insanely spec'd PCs. But what we got and they got was Diablo Immortal, a mobile game, which we'll talk about a bit later. But this announcement was painstakingly off base, that the people at BlizzCon were in disbelief and thought it was a joke, bringing us to one of the most famous interactions ever.
Is there any plans to make this playable on PC, or is this just strictly mobile forever?
We don't have any plans at the moment to do PC. Do you guys not have phones?
Yeah, you guys all have phones, right?
The Blizzard of old would not talk to their fans like this. That Blizzard has died. I know I said 2018 was just bad, but 2019 was even worse. Frank Pierce, the last of the OG3, would leave Blizzard in July of 2019 as well, right before one of Blizzard's biggest controversies, the banning of Hearthstone pro Blitzchung. In a post-match interview, Chung threw on a mask and goggles and protested for Hong Kong's liberation from the Chinese government. Acting as an agent for China, Blizzard cut the broadcast, banned Chung for a year, made him forfeit all his winnings, and even fired the 2 casters who were next to him. Obviously, this did not go down well for Blizzard. Making national headlines, massive protests were formed, employees staged a walkout, and players all over the world organized boycotts against Blizzard. All because Blizzard didn't want to ruin their relationship with NetEase and lose their Chinese market. The obsession with money runs deep in Activision Blizzard, especially when you try and release a rushed, horrific product like Warcraft 3 Reforged. which was supposed to bring me back to the golden age of gaming. I mean, it was Warcraft 3, but something inside my brain told me not to get it, and luckily I listened. Reforged was an utter disaster. Talk about ruining one of the best games ever by literally making it worse in every way imaginable. How can you make the graphics worse in 2020? Most of the promised features like HD graphics, redone cutscenes, and upgraded UI were awful, or they weren't even in there. Blizzard didn't even add clans or offline play. They even managed to upset the modders by adding full ownership of all the mods to the EULA that were created in Reforged. I wonder why they did that. Apparently, the blame was on mismanagement and Activision cutting the budget late. But we know that the OG Blizzard would have cut the game development or even delayed it if they knew it wasn't good enough. But with Activision, it was an attempt at a quick cash grab on nostalgia. Activision Blizzard's epic finale would finally come to an end with a huge lawsuit from the state of California after a 2-year investigation, claiming that employees had faced constant sexual harassment, including groping comments and advances due to a frat boy workplace culture, targeted at mostly women and minorities. This video is not about these issues though, so I won't go into great detail. Just know that they aren't very good. And this idiot finally got fired. Also, Activision cleared itself of all wrongdoings. That's literally the most Activision thing I've ever seen. Blizzard became a husk of what it used to be after the Activision merger. But who is to blame? Was Blizzard always heading in this direction anyway? For the most part of their existence, the OG3 were always with Blizzard in some form or fashion. But it is interesting that Morhaime and Pierce left in 2018 and 19, right before the investigation. I'm not implying anything, of course. It could just be pure coincidence. But it does make you wonder. I do strongly believe that Activision and Bobby Kotick were the cancer that spread through Blizzard's decision-making though. While not directly influencing Blizzard's decisions, it's more likely Activision set very high profit goals that influenced Blizzard's decision-making in ways they might not have done before. Take Diablo Immortal as the prime example. It's literally pay to win, with the most disgusting microtransaction scheme ever, but it's making millions and millions of dollars. Activision Bobby Kotick haven't only been abusing their workers, but the loyal fans of Blizzard for years. The acquisition from Microsoft was also out of left field, coming out of nowhere and arguably the worst possible time to acquire Activision Blizzard, with all the negative press. But that might have made them even cheaper. With Microsoft probably getting the deal through and owning Activision Blizzard, I feel like there is a ton of work that needs to be done to get old Blizzard back. Cutting Kotick and the profit-first mindset would be a start, but even that is probably never going to get us the original Blizzard, and that's a shame. Check out this video here for more studios that have failed their fans.